Hi, I'm Dan, this is at Midlife Crisis Motorcyclist, and this is the third step on my Ducati awakening in the form of the Ducati Scrambler. Now, I've kind of done this all the wrong way around, because when I set out, I thought I'd maybe start with a bike like this and kind of work my way up through the Ducati range, build up, get to some of the bigger, more serious bikes. As it turned out, the first Ducati I rode was that Multistrada V4 Rally, absolute monster of an adventure bike. Then I did a track day on an actual monster, and now here I am with the Scrambler. So yeah, I've kind of done it all the wrong way around, haven't I? But there we go, I'll dry my eyes, I'm sure I'll get over it. Anyway, what is the Scrambler? Well, to some people it might be disparagingly looked at as, a baby Ducati, certainly to all those kind of red-blooded owners of Panigales and Multistradas and things like that who, it might threaten their kind of masculinity to be associated with a mere 800cc kind of trendy hipster bike like this. I think they might be missing out, but let's find out. As for the Scrambler itself, this is the second generation. This was launched in 2022, and it's kind of similar to the original, but just has an updated frame. They kind of repositioned the shock. They made a few changes to the engine. It's still the same 803cc air-cooled Desmodue L-twin, so that's obviously an iconic style of engine for Ducati. They added a few things like ride-by-wire throttle, so that means they could add the different rider modes, cornering ABS, cornering traction, things like that. You can also add a quick shifter now if you want it, but fundamentally it kind of sticks with the same formula that the original Ducati Scrambler did so well with. Is it a proper Scrambler though? Now, to my mind, the benchmark for this sector is the Triumph Scrambler 900, which I've enjoyed very much previously. That has the look, as far as I'm concerned. It's got the twin shock rear, it's got the high set exhaust. That to me looks like a proper retro Scrambler. Then you've got things like the Benelli Leoncino 800. Again, it's got that kind of old school Scrambler look with the high exhausts. Also the Fantic Caballero 700 as well. When you compare this with those, it perhaps looks, well, to my eyes, when it first arrived, I thought it maybe looked a bit more like a cruiser or something like that. You've got these really high bars, you've got this low slung exhaust, quite a low seat. Is it really a Scrambler? Well, when you look at it, it does actually have a bit more cred than you might initially think. Sure, most of them are probably going to be used as kind of, urban runarounds, but it does have a bit of cred as well. They've got this nice chunky Pirelli MT-06 tyre, that gives it a bit of attitude. You've got the bigger 18-inch front wheel. You have the nice retro kind of mocked up tape on the headlights there. The forks and the monoshock rear, they've got 150mm travel. So although definitely aimed more at kind of urban riders, it does have a bit of proper Scrambler cred after all. In terms of pricing, this Icon model starts at £9,995. Then you can go to what's called the full throttle. That has a Terminoni exhaust and a quick shift. That costs £10,995. And then also for £10,995 you can have the night shift, which is a bit more of a kind of flat tracker look with the flat bars and the spoke wheels, and I think would probably be my pick out of the three. There's also the 1100 Sport Pro, but that's really a kind of completely different bike, so we'll just set that on one side for the moment. That sounds expensive, doesn't it? But then when you compare it with the Triumph, that's about the same sort of money. The Fantic as well, a smidge cheaper, but in the same kind of ballpark. The Benelli is a bit cheaper, starts I think at £8,000, but I've seen them for £7,000 at the moment, so quite a chunk cheaper, but then it's perhaps less exotic with its sort of Chinese parentage and all that kind of stuff. But where Ducatis normally look really expensive, it's kind of on the money for the class, isn't it? But what's it like to ride, and can it deliver on more than just that kind of trendy hipster image, and is it a true Ducati? Well, let's go and find out. So here we go on the Scrambler, and there are some questions hanging over it, aren't there? Such as, is it a real Ducati? Is it a proper Scrambler? And does it deserve, some of the perhaps sneers you'd get from the big boys about it being just a kind of, a hipster plaything, a baby bike, a beginner's bike, all that kind of thing? Well, if it is, what is the harm in that? Because, as we all know, motorcycling is struggling to attract a younger audience, desperately needs new people to come into it, so on that basis, what's wrong with Ducati having a bike aimed at the younger crowd? And also, isn't it funny how we refer to this as like a baby bike? It's a 10 grand 800cc premium machine, so I think we'll have less of the baby. Thank you very much. But is it a proper Ducati? Well, I'm going to say, if we look at the engine, which, let's face it, is heart and soul of any bike, but particularly an Italian bike, I think we're going to have to say that it is, isn't it? Because it's an air-cooled L-twin. And quite possibly, I'll need to check. I did have a look at the Ducati lineup. I think it might be the last air-cooled L-twin in the Ducati range, and that's quite an emotional thing, isn't it? So, yeah, engine-wise, I think it's a Ducati, and I think that engine is an important differentiator between this bike and the competition, because in the class they're all twins, they're all about the same size, power is kind of comparable, but the Scrambler's selling point really is that it definitely has the most exotic engine. You know, it's an air-cooled desmodromic engine with all the kind of heritage that carries with it. It's not just another liquid-cooled parallel twin like nearly all the other bikes in the class have. And quite rightly, it kind of dominates the riding experience. It certainly sounds pretty rude, and although 76 horsepower is kind of middle of the range for the bikes it's up against, the Scrambler is pretty light, so Ducati being Ducati, it quotes a weight figure without fuel, which is 176 kilos, which is about on a par with the Fantic, which also quotes weight the same way. You know, the Triumph Scrambler is, I think, 220 something kilos, so even if you add fuel, it's a pretty light bike, and it feels it as well. It just feels really responsive, so, you know, even from fourth gear, you know, it picks up pretty well, and that lightness just kind of, you feel that in every move the bike makes. So, you know, tip it into a corner here, it just kind of feels really chuckable, which kind of makes sense given that the target audience are kind of, as I keep saying, kind of city dwellers, commuters, things like that. But it's really fun to ride on twisty country roads as well. I mean, sure, novelty might wear off if you're on kind of fast sweeping A roads, but on a road like this where, you know, it's twisty turny hills and all that kind of stuff, it's really nice to chuck about, and the engine's nice and responsive. It's got a good kind of burble on the overrun and things like that. It's got just a lot more character than many modern engines have. And that's kind of what you want out of a Ducati, isn't it? You're buying for the, you know, the Italian character, the heart and soul and all that kind of stuff. but seemingly the Scrambler's got that. And it all feels like a nicely balanced package as well. The gearing's quite short, but that's fine. It means you get quite busy with the gearbox, which is no hardship because it's nice to use. The hydraulic clutch, so it's pretty light. The engine's lovely and responsive. So whether you're kind of at kind of back road speeds or just bezzing around town, it's just fun, really fun. And it's a bigger bike than I expected as well, although that seat looks low. There's a decent stretch in the cockpit, so it doesn't feel like you're riding a little toy bike. Sure, it's a small bike, but I'm about 6 foot, and I was pleased that it feels like there's a bike under me, not just a little plaything. So I'm not entirely sold on these kind of high-rise handlebars and the kind of the upright riding position that they give. It does feel a bit cruiser-like, a bit more like the Royal Enfield shotgun I was on not so long ago than what I'd consider a Scrambler should feel like. So maybe the night shift version is a bit more sporty in that sense, but again, around town probably these high-rise bars probably more appropriate. I have done the commute on it a couple of times, and it's certainly very easy to thread through the traffic and filtering and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, you've got the choice there, haven't you? You've got the night shift if you want it. The suspension, the chassis feels really good as well, so 150mm of travel is enough to kind of soak up the bumps, whether that's out on the country lanes like this or speed bumps and potholes and stuff around the city. So the damping feels really nicely controlled as well. There's no adjustment in it per se, but feels like the setup's really nice. It's kind of firm enough to give you something to lean on when you are pressing on. The bike doesn't feel wallowy or anything like that. It feels nicely composed, but with a bit more suspension travel than perhaps a kind of more road optimized bike, it does have a plushness about it as well. So that's a really nice balance. Braking, although there's just the one disc up front, it's enough. Again, it's a light bike, so it doesn't need twin discs. So and I think what's nice is, same with all Scramblers, even the big ones, is that when you end up on a kind of narrower road like this one, it's still a fun bike to ride. If you're on a bigger, more powerful or kind of sportier bike, you might feel a bit frustrated if you ended up on a single track lane like this, but on a Scrambler it just feels a bit more, it feels kind of fun getting on a road like this, and just kind of, even if you're backing off a bit and kind of taking it a bit steadier, you kind of end up taking some fun little shortcuts and diversions. And I think that's really fun about all Scramblers. I think that's what attracts me to them as a kind of genre of bike. And I know some people just kind of dismiss them as sort of hipster playthings, style over content and all that kind of thing, but I think there's a real place for them. But most of all, and what you'd want out of a Ducati, the Scrambler 800 has got character, and it's got it with the kind of the mod cons as well, so the traction control and the rider modes and all that kind of thing that the newer, younger audience that it's aiming at are going to want out of a bike. I'm not entirely sold on this little TFT screen here. I'm not sure I like screens on bikes anyway, but it's a bit small and fiddly, a bit gimmicky. I'm not sure it really fits with the kind of the retro vibe. You know, if I were wanting to ride a Scrambler, I think I'd want a proper analog dial or some kind of version of it. I think the Triumph Scrambler 900 does a better job with that. And I still wonder about the look of it. I still think, although it seems to have the cred to counter a proper Scrambler, I think there are others in the class that if you really, really dig the Scrambler thing, they do it perhaps a bit better. So perhaps the Fantic, perhaps the Benelli as well. So it's not perfect, but it is a hell of a lot of fun, and it just encourages you to kind of chuck it around, and the noise is absolutely fantastic. And I think that, and the kind of the provenance of the engine, those two things are enough to sell it to me. So yeah, it's a fun bike. Okay, so the weather might have taken a bit of a turn for the worse, but if a bright yellow Ducati can't brighten an otherwise dreary day, what can? And I've really, really enjoyed riding this Scrambler. I think it's interesting to explore that whole, it's just a little bike thing, you know, maybe some of the kind of less positive stereotypes people might associate, especially if they've watched any of the kind of somewhat cringy publicity material that comes with the bike. I understand that, but I think if you're kind of dismissing this bike because it's small and not, you know, red-blooded enough to counter a real Ducati, I think you're really missing out, because it's a lot of fun. And at its heart, you know, it's got an air-cooled Desmodromic L twin. If that doesn't make it a Ducati, I don't know what does. Also, small bikes, obviously they're not good for kind of long trips or touring or, you know, maybe faster A-road type riding, but out here in the countryside on a kind of twisty lanes or in the city, they make so much sense. It's the fact that it's light, you can just fling it around. I will say it does encourage you to ride like, well, a bit of an idiot at times, in a nice way. So I like that. You know, it's got a bit of attitude to it. And I think, you know, there's indefinable things about bikes, you know, soul, character, emotions, all that kind of thing. You know, we project those onto these mechanical objects, but hey, if a Ducati can't do it, then no bike can. And I think that gives this bike a really strong selling point over its main rivals. Now, I enjoyed the Triumph Scrambler 900 a lot, and that does have a lot of character, a very different character, but it definitely has charisma as well. I've not yet tried the Benelli or the Fantic. I'd be really keen to do so. I think I've still got a few misgivings about how Scrambler this bike is, given the look of it with the low slung exhaust and all that kind of thing. And I think the Fantic and the Benelli do a better job of doing that kind of retro Scrambler look. So yeah, really interested to try those. But I think as a bike, as a thing to ride, this Ducati Scrambler it's an absolute hoot, and it's definitely deserving of the name. Anyway, the weather is definitely turning for the worse, so I think it's probably time I headed for home. If you like the video, make sure you hit like. If you haven't subscribed already, please do so, and hopefully we can do some videos on that Benelli and the Fantic in due course and see how they go. For now, I'll say thanks for watching, goodbye, and ride safe.